Is penal substitution in and of itself, is it contrary to orthodoxy?
Well, as with anything, it always depends on what you mean, right? So I think penal substitution, it's kind of like sola fide or faith alone. As a phrase, you can interpret the phrase in a myriad of different ways, some of which are orthodox and some of which are not. And with respect to penal substitution, I think the way in which most people take that phrase is intimately tied together with the notion of imputation. So if justification is what happens when the obedience or righteousness of Christ is counted to our account as if it belonged to us, well, then the inverse of that, or the other side of that coin, is the way in which substitution is interpreted, which is that the sins which we've committed are counted as if they belong to Christ, and he's punished in our place so that we don't have to go through that punishment. So I think that is contrary to orthodoxy. But I think there's a New Testament way of talking about penalty and justification and things like that, which is obviously consistent with orthodoxy. And that's to understand that penalty signifies death. From the beginning to the end of the Bible, the penalty, which is our enemy, is death. So a lot of people take, what is Adam's condemnation? And they think, well, it's eternal damnation or something like that, and we're saved from eternal damnation. But in the way in which these concepts are related to each other in the Bible, eternal damnation is not the primary enemy of which death is an echo. It is rather that eternal damnation is the eternal actualization or extension of death, which is our primary enemy. And so how exactly is it that Christ redeems us from our transgressions? Well, death is what we are subject to because life only comes from God, and sin by definition is to turn away from God. So to turn away from God leads invariably to death just by the wiring of what these concepts mean. Christ is infinitely alive, being infinitely God. In joining himself with our nature, he communicates that uncreated life to our created life. And then when he tastes the death that we all inevitably taste, he fills it with life so that death ceases to be the end of the road and it becomes a door to resurrection. So I think the way to contrast some popular perceptions of how the atonement works to the way I think it actually works in the Bible, Christ didn't die in order that we can live, but rather he died in order that we might die with him, so that he lives in order that we might live with him. I think that's a much more biblical way of understanding how substitution works. Christ doesn't go through something so that we can avoid it. He goes through what we go through so that we can go through it with him and then share in his life.